You're listening to 99.1 WQRT LP, and welcome to Radio Free Book Club for October 2022. I'm Ken Honeywell. I'm a writer and reader from Indianapolis, and today we'll be discussing one of the most talked about books of the summer, Tom Perrotta's sequel to his 1998 novel Election, Tracy Flick Can't Win, in which we encounter that very memorable character about 30 years from where we left her as a new high school graduate. Today, I'm joined in the WQRT studio by a couple of returning members and one new member. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Craig, why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Craig Von Deylen. I'm an architect, real estate developer, arts patron, and the father of a high school government and current affairs teacher.
That will come in handy on this discussion, I imagine. Yeah, Tracy.
Traci Cumbay, a marketing writer, hiker, baker, and dad joke enthusiast.
Yeah, maybe you can grace us with one of those later if we behave ourselves. And Barb, we have our new member here today.
That would be me, Barbara Shoup, novelist. I work with the Indiana Writers Center. Oh gosh, I like to travel. I like to look at paintings. I am addicted to reading, and yeah, that's about it.
Great. Well, we're glad you're here and you'll fit right in. So, yeah, thanks, everybody. And just a reminder to everybody listening, this may be that rare book club where we actually talk about the book, and we will absolutely be spoiling this one. So if you're planning to read Tracy Flick Can't Win, or you haven't finished it, come back later and listen to us. You can find all the episodes of Radio Free Book Club on Mixcloud or on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, so let's get started, and let's actually, while we were getting going here, we were talking a little bit about Tom Perrotta. What's all your familiarity with Tom Perrotta? Tracy?
I've seen more of the movies and shows from his books than I have done any actual reading until now. I did read Little Children and quite liked that, but then otherwise it's the Election movie and the Leftover series and Mrs. Fletcher, the series that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, Craig?
I've never watched the series, but I did watch Election, loved it when it came out originally, and this is the first time I've read one of his books.
Yeah. Barb?
I've read most of them, I think. We were talking earlier, what came before Election? Because I don't know if I read those.
Joe College is the one that I remember.
Stories?
No, it wasn't.
No? Okay. I don't remember.
That was a novel also.
Okay.
Was Little Children before Election or after?
I think it was after.
I loved that one.
Yeah, Mrs. Fletcher, which I completely forgot. I didn't see the series. I read the book, but I completely forgot the story. And The Leftovers. I thought The Leftovers was a really good book, and I just, for whatever reason, I couldn't get into the HBO series. I heard it was really good.
Yeah.
Tracy, you're nodding at me.
I'm a big fan, yeah.
You're a big fan.
Absolutely.
Non-science fiction loving Tracy is a big fan of more science fiction than she thinks she is. But yeah, I mean, obviously that was a really big movie and a big breakout role for Reese Witherspoon. And it's hard to imagine the character differently from Reese Witherspoon. And it's interesting, Tom Perrotta has said, basically, the character of Tracy Flick was taken from him. Tracy Flick became Reese Witherspoon and what everyone else thought about the character.
Did he say how he felt his idea was different?
I didn't go that far into the interview, so I didn't hear that. But I mean, it seems like in the book anyway, which I've read a couple times recently, he doesn't really take a side. He doesn't seem to take a side. He seems to be pretty objective about whether Mr. McAllister or Tracy is the real villain here. Kind of. I mean, it's hard for Jim McAllister to not come off as a villain in the book, but everyone made Tracy the villain of the movie. I mean, she was the villain of the movie.
Well, he makes you choose in the book.
He does make you choose.
Depending on who you are,
right.
You're going to decide who you think is the villain.
Yeah, but he doesn't. But I think he plays it pretty even in the book.
Agree.
But yeah, I mean, I think in that way, Tracy Flick became a character that he didn't necessarily anticipate her becoming. Yeah. And any opinions about Tom Perrotta? Barb, you say you've read most of his work.
Yeah, I've always just enjoyed his view of the world. That it's just sideways, It's just so skewed, and he just will see things like that whole playing out of the park where the mothers would go to the park. I've forgotten the name of the book now.
Little Children.
Thank you. That's how great my memory is. But just he'll take a normal situation and just turn it. And he's got such a great sense of irony, which I sort of thought was missing in this book, and a kind of a wicked sense of humor.
Yeah. Yeah. Tracy, I know, Craig, you're not that familiar with his work. Any opinion about Tom Perrotta's work in general?
No, and any opinion I might have had would have been colored by how much I hated this book.
All right. Well, maybe we should.
All right, then.
Maybe we should just get into that.
That's great. I love this book, and it seems like Tracy, whenever she hates a book, I love the book.
Oh, that's
We're
funny.
like a point counterpoint.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's.
I'm kind of more with you, Tracy.
Yeah,
I was very disappointed in this book.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, and let's just talk about why. Why did you guys feel that way?
Nothing happened for a very, very long time, and then the thing that happened was absurd. I got irritated by the shifts in perspective, which felt just useless and really also amateurish. You could have changed some of the details, like, take out the RV or lose the dog app, and you wouldn't be able to tell who was here. Who was who. They all sounded exactly the same and basically behaved the same. So that was irritating. And when I got halfway through and there was still nothing happening, I got really irritated and just put it aside and didn't expect to finish it, actually. Although, Ken, I love you. So I breezed through the last 80 pages this morning.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I really appreciate that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I loved it just because I thought it was an easy read. It was a wonderful character development piece that was kind of like listening in on people's thoughts that they would not normally have talked about. And I think that the developing of characters, based even on the RV thing, was very interesting and very real to me. I could really understand who they were. I don't necessarily agree with them, and I think a lot of them were demented. But it was just kind of an interesting character development piece.
Well, that's another thing. I don't really feel like anyone was demented either. I was just bored by all of them.
All right.
Yeah, they were kind of predictably demented when they were demented. My problem with this book, and I'm thinking of it as a writer, as a person who writes novels, and I think the best novels happen when you're looking at something you care about sideways, through a novel. And I feel like in Election, he was doing that, And in this book, I don't know what he was interested in. I don't have any idea what he was interested in. It's not really so much about power in the way the other one was. And I also think that sequels are really dangerous, and they're especially dangerous to a good writer, because when you're finished with a book, you're finished with the material. Right? And so to do a successful sequel, you have to be able to imagine that set of characters in another scenario that you care deeply about. And I don't think he did that here. I think he just thought, well, that would be interesting to do a sequel. And I felt like, as a person who I liked the first book, I felt like he really just didn't deal at all with the repercussions of what had happened to her as a teenager. He didn't, we didn't really see how they affected her life. I could hardly believe, really, that a person who was so ambitious and so just determined as a young person would be just so satisfied and not have any anger whatsoever. As much as she might have loved her mother, to come home and, have to give everything all that she had dreamed of, to give that all up and not to have learned really anything. She does kind of think about it a little bit and think about, I know I was groomed and this person was just trying to make me feel special. But it was just cursory. She didn't
Agreed.
She didn't deal.
And this is a person who's constantly thinking about her relationship to the world and her position relative to other people. So it does seem like a gross oversight not to investigate that a little bit.
Yeah. The only bit I saw of it was when Lily remembered that Tracy had taken her aside and said, you're better. You're better than they are. And that was the young Tracy speaking, which I thought was a nice moment. But I just didn't feel like there was any substance to it. It was plot driven. And it was, I didn't even really believe the plot in the end.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tom.
Well, I'll echo Tracy's comment. I think it was hard to distinguish one character from the next if you were just going by how they were speaking
and how they looked at the world.
And honestly, I felt the same about Election. It was also very similar in that way. The other thing, Barb, I would ask though, that the piece that you shared with us from Vox, the writer there also suggested that Perrotta's characters are not always honest with themselves, and we're first person for most of the characters in both of those books. So I wonder if part of that is just Tracy not being honest with herself.
I think you're absolutely right. I think she's absolutely dissatisfied with where her life ended up. She just is at that point in her life where she's approaching middle age, or she actually has entered middle age, and she has realized this is where I am, and she's still ambitious. She still very much wants to be in a position of power, and this is her opportunity to attain that position of power, albeit in a suburban high school as a principal. And I think that she is just not willing to admit that herself, that she's gotten to this point and this is the best that she could potentially do. Although when faced with the concept of not being able to attain the job that she wants, she was willing to consider going back and trying to reestablish the dreams that she had set up when she was a younger person. So.
When an unreliable narrator's work, the reader knows what the unreliable narrator does not know about himself or herself. I didn't feel that. I didn't know. I didn't feel like, oh, that's so interesting that she doesn't see that. Or, wait a minute, don't you remember? I didn't feel that. I just didn't think there was enough character development for that unreliable narrator thing to work. So I didn't disagree. I didn't agree with the person who said, well, maybe we're just not getting what he was trying to do, because I don't, if he was trying to do it, I don't think he did it.
There were a lot of little clues about Tracy Flick in the book, too, where she said she never had friends or she didn't like to be alone. Yeah. There were a lot of, if a psychologist read this book, they might have a completely different insight about her personality based upon their understanding of the human psyche. Yeah. She was pretty interestingly deep in an odd way. And then what she did in the end was completely unexpected. So it was kind of disjointed. But there were some little nuggets about her personality that I found very interesting that they really didn't explore very deeply. So Tom didn't explore very deeply.
So, clearly we're living in a time where the world sees Tracy differently from how the world saw her back in Election. And we've kind of touched on that, pretty much everyone, critics and Tracy was used kind of as a model for, she was, you mentioned Tracy Flick in the same breath with like Hillary Clinton, right? She became kind of like the archetype of the power hungry woman. Clearly we're not in that day now. And, but do you think Tracy has changed from this book? Or in this book from Election, or do you think it's just the way we look at her has changed?
Well, she's obviously changed because she's not behaving really in the same way. My problem is I don't know what changed her. And I want to know that. I want to know how she became the person that she is now, and how she processed the stuff that happened to her in the first book to become that person.
I think the answer has a lot to do with having to leave school to take care of her mom. That seemed to be the turning point that the author was pointing to. And
is that, did you find that credible? I mean, she abandoned all of her plans. I mean, as she said, being president wasn't her dream. It was her, I don't think it was planned, but basically that's what she was saying.
I found that totally credible. I mean, I've seen that happen in a lot of people's lives, and that creates a mellowing effect on their ambitions, and it really changes people from that driven person that they were when they were younger. So I've actually seen that happen in people's lives, and it really changes you. And it's unfortunate in a lot of cases, but it does happen.
Yeah, I found it credible that would happen, and that she would feel obligated or loving to her mom. I guess maybe I never really understood the nature of her relationship with her mother in the first place. You know, her mom was very pushy in terms of when she was younger, but also very self-sacrificing. And, you know, that can create lots of different kinds of feelings. It can be guilt, it can be love, it can be all kinds of things. She certainly wanted to get away when she was a kid, also totally credible.
Yeah.
I just found her a little bit of a mystery how she got from, you know, how she became the person she did. I also thought it was really interesting that, you know, the little thing about how she had the affair with a professor,
right?
Which is such a I mean, that's a kind of a pattern of behavior. Which sort of surprised me.
But that goes back to the psychologist again. I mean, she grew up without a father. She was looking for father figures in her life.
Yeah, but we, the readers, shouldn't have to figure that out. We, the readers, should have the information to come to the conclusions, you know, based on her behavior, her interactions with other people. And I don't feel like we had that. I just don't feel like she was a fully rounded character. I don't doubt at all that many people end up like that. And it's certainly not the worst thing in the world, right? You come to terms with what you thought you wanted, and then what you have. And a lot of times, you know, you may conclude, really, if I'd known that was out there, I would have wanted it anyway. I just wish I knew how she got there.
Yeah, I would argue that we all do that.
Well, I think we all do.
Temper our
Absolutely, we all do. Yeah, which could have been that could have been what he really cared about. I mean, that is what might have made that book really powerful. Mm-hmm. If we saw that was what she was dealing with, you know, that she had come to a place, she found a life that she really loved, and now, you know, she wasn't being appreciated in that life, and it was going to be the same old thing again, you know, the boys' club. I would have loved that.
I don't know if she really liked her life necessarily, as she tolerated it and was willing to live it.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But she seemed to be pretty happy with her career. Mm-hmm. And felt competent at her career and wanted to make that next step.
Well, all the characters in this book, with the exception of the two students, were basically dealing with the same things, not getting to the point in their life where they expected to.
Yeah.
And living in a suburban world where the best they could get is what they had, mm-hmm. and just trying to make what they could of it.
Yeah. Tracy, were you going to say something?
I think that the problem Barb is describing is that it all is just so superficial. We're not seeing any sort of internal wrangling, really. And even when events transpire, for instance, you know, Tracy has this ongoing quandary about whether she's going to spend Thanksgiving with her boyfriend, and then just all of a sudden he's out of the picture. There's no actual reckoning. You don't see anything happening. It's just a little bit of buildup and then moving on.
Right. That also happened with Bridget's nipples.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Bridget's nipples were there, and then they were gone. Right. That was dealt with very, very quickly.
I guess Bridget got over it.
Once again, the minutia of suburban high school life.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, you know, suburban life for a minute. You know, Tom Perrotta is often, you know, looked at as, he's kind of lauded as being like the, you know, like the bard of the suburbs. Laura, I have a quote from Laura Miller in the New Yorker in her review of Election. She said, "Perrotta's 21st century suburbs are dimmer than Updike's," she was talking about. "They have drifted to the periphery of our collective fantasy life. These towns aren't where anybody is headed, only where they end up, by mistake or misfortune or simple passivity." That's how she described Perrotta's suburbs, and maybe suburbs in general.
Welcome to Fishers, Indiana.
That sounds like a New York person's description of suburbia. I think people do go there on purpose a lot of the time. Go ahead.
Did
Tracy.
you have any sense of the place? I really didn't
No, I
get
didn't either.
any
Somewhere
idea
in
where
New
we
Jersey.
were.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, and I don't, and I think that is striking. There's almost no description of anything.
It's intentional. I think it's supposed to be anywhere. I mean,
Well, it is, but still.
But anywhere in suburbia.
Right.
yes.
Right. Yeah.
This is not New York and Chicago.
Right.
Detroit.
I will say I love the names of the restaurants. The first one was Kenny O's Bistro Pub and Tavern.
Right. Bistro Pub and
The
Tavern.
cafe.
That's great.
Right. I know. And then they went to they held the secret board meeting at Casa de Pamplona. And she went to the Lemon Drop Tavern after the dinner and got drunk and went to the party.
I believe every one of those are like concepts for restaurants and Fishers right now.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Could be.
Yeah, apologies to all our listeners in Fishers. I think, I also think, just kind of the pettiness of boards, of those kinds of
yes.
boards, is pretty well observed, and also just kind of the central nature of high school sports and in
Yes.
the suburbs.
I thought that was done really well, too. I would agree with that.
Yeah. I lived, again, Tracy, my last note to myself was there's not much there, very little physical description, and Craig, maybe to your point, maybe that's part of it too. And unfortunately, I mean, I just thought of this standing here, Tracy, but maybe that's why nothing happened, because, nothing happens in the suburbs except for these illicit affairs and things that are.
Well, then don't write a book about it.
Yeah. So Tracy swears that she is not a victim.
This is getting confusing for me with the name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tracy.
Tracy Flick.
We can call you. How about if we call you Trace I?
Which one's Tracy and which one's Tracy?
Yeah,
Hold on.
now
Tracy.
that.
Tracy Flick says she's not a victim. I mean, she really insists that she's not a victim. She starts to see herself a little bit differently, but she never really crosses over the line to admit it, I don't think. Is she a victim?
Yes.
I would say yeah.
Yeah, I think any 15-year-old girl in that situation is a victim. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she didn't, make those choices.
Yeah.
Not with the wherewithal she would have had if she was older, obviously. But yeah, she was a victim for sure.
She made those choices in a circumstance where she wasn't equipped to make them.
But I think that's where she's coming from, though, when she says she's not a victim, that she feels that she did make those choices.
Yeah.
And she did make them. She just didn't know enough to make them at the time.
And don't forget, she thought that she was more mature than he was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to admit that she's a victim is also to admit that she wasn't actually special.
Right.
And she does sort of ponder that a little bit somewhere, where she sort of sees how the way he made her feel so special, and that she recognizes that was a manipulative thing, but hadn't seen that before.
I think Kyle's wife kind of identified that she was a victim, and she started to realize that as Kyle's wife was
Yeah, I
explaining
agree.
that to her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, but to your point also, Craig, I mean, she also repeated the same thing with the other professor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And speaking of characters who showed up and then went away for good, her daughter.
Right.
No kidding.
She's not in the second half of the
She's just
book.
not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not there at all.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about Marissa for a minute. That just felt super weird to me. Like, it felt like and maybe it's just me, but I have never had someone pursue me to be a friend the way Marissa.
Oh, but you're a guy. I think women, I felt
Really?
like that was credible. I mean, it's not something I could really see myself doing necessarily, but
Yeah.
but I did. And I didn't, I mean, I felt like it was genuine on her part. I thought she was lonely. She was married to a guy who was really a jerk.
Oh, I completely hated that guy.
Oh,
I
he
mean,
was awful. He was
Yeah.
just awful.
Yeah.
And, she found in Tracy an intelligent person and maybe somebody who was different from all these other people, awful people that she was having to deal with. So, yeah, I thought it was kind of sweet in a way.
It was pretty intense, though.
It was intense. It was intense.
Yeah, there was a lot of towel wearing and saunas.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. That was a little weird.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
but I could
I'll
see
go
we're
with
also
that.
the same thing because she'd moved to this city, or this town she'd never probably been to before, didn't know anyone there, trying to repair a marriage that was never going to make it. With a jackass.
Which why would you want to? He was awful. Yeah. But that was at least a subplot that sort of had a bit of an arc. I mean, she did end up becoming friends with her, and I think that was important for her because she didn't have friends. She wasn't willing to be vulnerable ever in her life to have friends that were women. That was probably maybe the first real friend that she had allowed herself.
Ever had.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And then she stuck around and may become the community leader that they needed instead of Kyle.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Kyle, and I want to say, I'm not sure there is a real likable male character, I guess Principal Jack was kind of likable, but he was a jerk too. I mean, almost
he was
everyone
flawed.
in
I
both
don't think
of these.
he was a jerk. I think he was flawed.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go there.
And he
with
was a
you.
person of his time.
Yeah, I just think that's, the more I hear that, though, the more I think that's just an excuse.
He was a terrible
I mean, we
husband.
had that same discussion with Vladimir, about how that, that's clearly a Me Too novel. And it's, that was, sort of the argument there, too, is we're all products of our time. And while that's true, I mean, I never talked the way any of the men in either of these books talk.
Yeah.
Now, I was around those people, so I know that stuff went on and continues to go on and all that, but they're all so horrible.
Yeah, they are. I felt sympathetic toward Vito, though.
I did too.
Agreed.
I really did.
He
Yeah.
was at least putting forth some effort.
Yeah.
He was, and I mean,
up until the very end.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he was hurt. He was having these brain problems. He knew it, but he didn't know what to do about it. And it, wrecked his relationship. I mean, maybe it was not that great before, but it certainly caused the end of the relationship with his family. And I felt like he was a sad case.
Though, I don't think there's anyone likable in this book. I don't really like Tracy. Marissa, I don't know well enough to really have an opinion about, except that she's really going after Tracy. The high school kids are complete non-entities. I don't know why they're there. Maybe front desk Diane?
She seemed nice.
She seems fine.
She seemed like a nice
Hall of
person.
Fame.
She may have
Nice,
been,
yeah.
I kind of have to agree with Tracy either.
But there's,
I agree.
I mean, she was also having an affair with
Jack.
yeah.
But she did
Willingly,
seem like a nice, she
Yeah.
did seem like a nice
Yeah,
person.
And maybe that's a product of the environment they're in. I mean, they're just not the kind of people we want to hang out with. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I had problems with the kids too. Why do you think they were there? Anybody have an opinion?
Well, they had to have kids because it's high school.
Well,
you'd have to do that. But they didn't pick interesting ones. The Lily, maybe there was a little something going there. But that whole thing about her relationship with Clem that contributed nothing to the story. But she was a kind of mirror image of Tracy as a high school kid in a way.
It felt like an old person going, okay, look, I know times have changed.
Right. That is exactly how I felt. It's like, you know what we should do? We should throw in a little ASMR.
That may be what it was. It's just, I got to make
and a
this prescient
non-binary
to
character.
today, so I'm going to do this with the kids because they represent the future.
But my Tom Perrotta would have made that funny. He would have have twisted it somehow, and it would have been funny, but it wasn't funny.
No, it
was
really
tiresome.
wasn't.
That whole thing.
I'm starting to hate this book.
Mission accomplished.
It should have
It's
been.
really ticking you off
It
now.
should have been funnier.
That's exactly
was
right.
not.
It was not funny, and he's funny.
Because Election was hilarious.
Exactly. For all of it, whatever the flaws were, it was funny. And this is not funny.
All right, you guys swayed me. It's terrible.
All right. Well, that reminded me of, and that idea that he's the old guy trying to think about the kids reminded me of what was that terrible Tom Wolfe book where I Am Charlotte Simmons? Is that what it was? Oh my gosh.
So.
That was like a grandpa imagining like what a sorority girl was
no,
like.
you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe I wanted to love this book because I fell in love with Reese Witherspoon in Election.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
I didn't like the character as much, but
you liked her.
Awesome.
She was so cute.
She was at the time.
Perky.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little older than that, but regardless, she did such a great job.
She did
that
do a good job.
overachiever.
She did.
And it's not an easy thing to do. So
no, what a signature role for her. And I wonder. I mean, I haven't seen the movie for a long time, but I wonder if our opinion about the character in the movie would change as much as our opinion about the character in the books has changed in these 30
Mine
years.
didn't. I just watched it last week.
Yeah.
I watched it again last week.
Yeah.
It held up for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But did you feel like Tracy was the villain?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, she to me, she was kind of like this archetypal type of high school girl.
Yeah.
And I don't like those kind of girls.
Yeah.
I never did. And so I was projecting that. So, and like I said before, I think how you think about that has more to do with who you are than who the character is, right? If you could relate to her, you might think she wasn't, but I didn't. I thought she was so manipulative.
well, girl or guy in high school, the overachievers drove me nuts.
Oh, they're awful.
Yeah.
They're just,
I was the last guy in the
insufferable.
class. I sat in the back row, So, they were just, ugh. But I mean, I didn't really necessarily see her as the villain. I just saw her as what she was. And I think a lot of people, now keep in mind, Matthew Broderick played the other potential villain, and I saw him because of Ferris Bueller's Day Off as this like lovable character. I mean, that was a seminal movie for us, and
Loved that
I always
movie.
thought he's such a great guy. He's just trying to defeat that overachiever, and I think that colored my impression.
Well, I guess, first of all, I don't think about villains and heroes in terms of novels. I just don't. I just think it's a bunch of people, and if it's a good novel, everybody has a problem that I can sympathize with, and I could sympathize with her because she doesn't have any friends. It's not making her happy what she's doing, and I could sympathize with him because I taught high school, and I know how that works, and he was having a hard time. So
let's talk a little bit about Reggie. That's another character who didn't actually appear.
I wish he had.
I do too.
He may have been the
right?
saving grace for that book.
Agreed.
So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, another just kind of episode that was talked about and didn't really go anywhere, but maybe kind of motivated the ending of Vito apologizing. Maybe that's who it is the person he still had to apologize to. So he had to kind of get that out before he died. Yeah. But man, I thought that was a disappointing element as well.
Yeah, because he was an interesting character, and the friendship was an interesting friendship. Yeah.
But again, it feels like another one of those current topics that got shoved into the book, like ASMR and
but it was more believable.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like the brain thing was way more believable than some of the other stuff.
Yeah.
And also that golden boy thing. There are always those guys in high school who are like that, and they don't necessarily. A lot of them turn out like him, which is sad.
Yeah. I agree. Well, let's talk about the shooting. That was something. And
Yes,
Glenn.
it was.
Yeah. Anybody have issues with the character of Glenn and his motivation to shoot Vito?
It's quite something to carry that around for, at least 20 years, right? Would it have been longer than that? A lunchroom incident. It was a pretty profoundly jerky move on Vito's part, but yeah, I didn't buy that. And I didn't buy that he would. So he had put himself in a position to be a guardian.
Right.
He was, what was his gig?
He was like a part-time cop.
Right. Mm-hmm. And yet he was willing to put himself in that position to give up his life just to shoot this guy in front of a lot of people. No, I didn't buy it.
And it was also not that whipped cream incident was not the source of his brother's problems, but it was the source of his problem. It was the source of Glenn's.
Because he didn't stand up.
Do anything.
Yeah, Glenn's problem was his own self-loathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, again, I mean, it just completely changed the whole tone of the book, and it just felt really weird to me.
I wonder if he knew from the beginning that was the way the book was going to end, or if he kind of, I mean, sometimes you get to a place where you're like, okay, what next? And that was...
Right, got a deadline, got a contract. I don't want to get my advance back.
Exactly.
Well, and the other thing is that, so Tracy didn't even have a nemesis until, we were 85% into the book.
Yes.
And then conveniently, someone else gets her nemesis out of the way through another unbelievable turn of events. So the shooting happens, and then the guy who is going to take over is just like, let her have changed my mind. Yeah. What?
Yeah. I wasn't buying it. But then again, I mean, as I said to you guys, I mean, then I thought about Empire Falls, Richard Russo. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that ends like with the school shooting. And I mean, that's you have to call it. It's a comedy, right?
More prepared for.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you saw that character on that path toward the school shooting. You really didn't see Glenn on that path to shooting Vito.
No, I mean, that's such a drastic thing to do. And if you don't sort of see the person pondering it, contemplating it, when did he think the first time that he might do that? I mean, it was when he stopped the cop or stopped Jack, and why did he stop Jack in the first place? On the road.
Just so he could get in the story before the second half of the book.
Okay, there you go.
I think this goes back to your point of the popular zeitgeist. It's we're experiencing a lot of those. I think that he could have ended the book with a much more funny and interesting ending. Where that didn't include a shooting, but maybe some other event or something could have happened that would have been a much better way to end the book that would have also been just as effective.
And really, in a way, an end that would be sort of like, well, here you are. Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That would have been maybe more believable and interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is a comedy, right? I mean, it might not be that funny, but
it's supposed to be a comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
I will go back to my original statement that I did like the book. I liked the book because it was easy to read. It was well written. I could understand the characters. I'm a very simple person. I mean, it fit with what I expected, and I'm guessing that's why it's popular. But I think there are some flaws that you guys have identified pretty effectively.
I wonder if it is popular. I mean, I don't know. I wonder how many people are disappointed, especially if they're Perrotta fans. I mean, if you hadn't read anything of his before, then disappointment wouldn't be in the picture.
Since you got it from the library, we could check and see how many people checked it out before you did. Remember how they used to have the card?
Yes, I know. You can't do that
15
anymore.
people
I hate that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's gotten very good reviews. I mean, in general, it has gotten very good reviews.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how it's selling. Well, Tracy Flick can't win. Does she win? Does she win in the end?
Well, she gets the job.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I would not. I'd take not getting shot over getting the job. I mean, frankly.
Right. And
jobs come and go.
She got it because of circumstances. She didn't get it because she achieved it. She got it because the other guy dropped out. It's not a big win.
No, I do think that whole process, though, that also struck me as something credible, was that the person who has been there all along, the loyal lieutenant, who's up for the next job.
No, they're never going to get it.
Right. They got to find the new shiny
God
person
forbid you should give it to somebody who's right there and that is really good. You got to go, 50 miles in a briefcase.
Right.
The person's going to be better.
And think of what a more interesting book it would have been if the other character, the overachieving woman who was up for the position for 27 seconds, and the coach came into the picture earlier, and we actually had a horse race.
Yeah. Well, that was, the election thing hinged on the election.
Right.
And it built up to that. But there wasn't really a fight like that.
No, at first I thought I was supposed to be worried about who was going to go into the Hall of Fame. But they've worked that out in a little friendly meeting. It was no problem whatsoever.
They were also going to vote about that, if you recall. Jack said they were going to all have to have a vote on that, by which he meant, I think, the school or maybe even the town was going to have to vote on that. No, they just decided in the back room.
Right.
Yeah.
The funny part was the other characters that they had found or had applied, or their family members.
Those letters were a hoot.
they were that was really funny because that was real.
Funny.
That was I could totally see that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Those were
Yeah, the one from the marketing lady hit a little too close to home.
Yeah, didn't it? I've seen a bunch of those kinds of let's laud the
makeup
local
person. That was funny. Yeah.
So, what do you think? I think I can read the room a little bit to see if we think we would recommend this book, Barb.
I wouldn't, especially if you were a fan of Tom Perrotta's, other than as something of interest. He did this, and you might want to look at it, but probably you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, Tracy.
I would recommend throwing it at his head.
Craig?
I would recommend, if you got 5 hours on a beach somewhere and you got nothing else to do and you really like Reese Witherspoon from Electra.
And you see her every time
at least you can
Tracy.
Go back and, see what happened to her character later. So
can you not see Tracy Flick as Reese Witherspoon as Tracy Flick?
Now? You mean in this book?
Yeah. Can you actually envision her as someone else?
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Oh, Barb, you're better. You're better than all of us.
I didn't really understand what you were saying. No, of course she's always going to be Reese Witherspoon.
And honestly, Reese Witherspoon is always Tracy Flick to me.
That's a true reader.
Point. That's a good point.
That's great.
Now, hopefully, if they do make it into a movie, whoever adapts it to the movie comes up with a lot better concepts.
Well, the movie and the book Election had completely different endings. The book ended with Mr. M becoming a car salesman, and the movie ended up with his wife divorcing him, and he goes off to New York and sort of has a great life. And he does see Tracy step out of a long black limousine at some point and starts running like hell.
Well, he throws a Pepsi at it. And
he does.
And
he
then
throws
runs
a Pepsi
away,
at it.
Which
That's
is,
right.
by the way, perfect.
That's right.
Right. So we have product placement and reinforcing Tracy as the villain.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, great discussion, everybody. So let's, with the time we have left, let's make some recommendations about other books we think listeners might enjoy. Traci Cumbay, you got one for us?
I do. This is a double recommendation. I read Bodywork by Melissa Febos, and it's just one of the best things I've read in ages. It's about being a human and a writer, and it's the insight is profound and the writing is really great and often hilarious. But because I then became obsessed with Melissa Febos, I was listening to a podcast that she was on, and she was talking about Audre Lorde. And somehow I have achieved degrees in English without ever having read Audre Lorde. And I'm reading the selected works right now, and it just knocks me on my ass. I just keep wanting to send lines to friends over and over again because it's amazing. So
great.
Both of those.
Yeah, great recommendations. Craig?
I'm about a third way through The Silent Patient.
Oh, I love that.
I can't even pronounce.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That's very interesting. It's developing kind of slowly, but it's kind of an
But it's an interesting thing. Yeah.
And then I got a suggestion of Forget the Alamo: The Rise and Fall of the American. So that one's actually kind of interesting. I want to read that one next.
All right. Awesome. Barb?
Becoming Duchess Goldblatt. What an amazing book. I don't even know how to begin to say what it's about, except that a very, very sad woman just didn't want, she was grieving, did not feel that she could see or be with anybody. And so she created this fictional character called Duchess Goldblatt on Twitter. And it goes from there. It's a really beautiful book about grief and life, and Lyle Lovett is involved. It's really good. And just FYI, I'm going to be interviewing, now will I be able to say her name right though, Jean Hanf Horowitz, who wrote The Plot, which some of you may have read and loved. But I'm going to be interviewing her about her most recent novel called The Latecomer, which I also would recommend, both of those books.
Oh, awesome.
At the JCC in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, great. Do you need tickets for that?
You do.
And where can we get tickets for that?
You can get tickets by going to the Jewish Community Center website.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking that in the spirit of Tracy Flick Can't Win, I should think of a good sequel to recommend. And it took me a minute to pick one that I thought was a good standalone sequel that's not part of a series. Like, Hilary Mantel just died last week. And those books are so great. Wolf Hall is great, and Bring Up the Bodies is great. But you really got to read Wolf Hall before you read Bring Up the Bodies. So the one I'm recommending is Kate Atkinson's follow-up to Life After Life, which is 1915's A God in Ruins.
Oh.
It has a lot of the same characters and some of the same settings, and Kate Atkinson calls it a companion piece as opposed to a sequel, not unlike Jennifer Egan called The Candy House, a sibling novel. And that's okay, but you really don't have to read Life After Life before you read A God in Ruins.
But I love Life After Life.
Me too.
Oh, me too.
She's got a new book coming.
She does, and maybe we'll talk about it one of these months. But you probably don't have to read Life After Life, but read Life After Life and then read A God in Ruins, because the end of A God in Ruins just packs a crazy emotional wallop after reading both of them together. It's a really good sequel.
I'm putting that on my list.
Yeah.
My list is so long.
Yeah. Well, as are all of ours, I believe. So, thanks everybody for the great discussion, and thank you all for listening. You can find notes to this and all our other shows on the Radio Free Book Club blog on medium.com. You can also follow us and drop us a note on Facebook and Twitter. You can stream the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show is produced by the amazing Oreo Jones for 99.1 WQRT LP in Indianapolis, and for Traci Cumbay, Craig Von Deylen, Barbara Shoup, and all the members of Radio Free Book Club, thanks for listening. Join us again next month, where we'll be discussing Ken Kalfus's novel 2 a.m. in Little America. And until then, go read a book.